ask you right now. But let me ask you this, Scott. You're on everywhere. I mean, where do you get the energy to do all of these shows, go on the road, speak as you are going to be speaking in New York City, January 15th at the Russian Samovar Room on 52nd Street, which I am going, and I know 10 of my friends are going. How do you do it, man? Where does that, is that Marine energy, getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning and making up the bed?
Well, somewhat. I mean, I am conditioned to put in hard work, but you got to believe in what you're doing. And this is the cause of informing people and participating in a broader discussion, debate, and dialogue about important issues. You know, that's one of the fundamental cornerstones, foundation stones of American democracy. And I just feel that, if I'm going to, talk the talk, I got to walk the walk. And right now there's a lot of demand, which means there's a lot of people out there who are looking for that kind of alternative point of view to expand the boundaries of discussion, because you're not getting it on mainstream media. You're not getting it on mainstream social media, with all of the banning, shadow banning, et cetera, that's taking place. Important voices are being silenced. And so when given an opportunity to participate in this discussion, debate, and dialogue, it would be sort of hypocritical of me, I think, to say no. I mean, at some point in time, look, I'm getting up there in the years, and the body says, hey, I need a little bit of sleep, and or my throat starts to give out or something, and I'll have to say no. But it's not a no total rejection. It's a, hey, no, I can't do it right now, but can we reschedule down the road? And I'll continue to do this until the demand no longer exists. And as we all know, this too shall pass. And at some point in time, the demand will go down, and I'll be able to return to a more sense of normalcy, so to speak, in terms of my day-to-day life.
Well, we need you now more than ever, a voice of reason. I mean, something healthy in our diets here. I can't watch MSNBC or CNN. They have the same people on. Ambassador McPhail. You've got people like that Spider guy on. You've got this guy Phil Mudd on. You got John Brennan and people of that nature. Always, they never give someone like you any time to rebut what they have to say. Have they even approached you?
Remember, excuse me. I used to be on air all the time back in the lead up to the Iraq War, but I became very inconvenient because all the names that you just mentioned are people that I would challenge. I would challenge their assertions. I would challenge their conclusions, and I would challenge it with, facts and logical argument. And it put them in a very difficult spot. And so I became inconvenient to these networks, and that's the primary reason why you're not going to see me on there today, because I am not fulfilling the narrative. I'm not enhancing the messaging that's going out. I'm not playing the game.
We are going to see you and here in the city, by the way, on the 15th. And that's going to be a great 4 p.m. I guess it's a dinner or a luncheon, late luncheon, and you're going to be giving away a book along with the dinner, and you're going to be signing books. I'm going to bring you some of those who can't make it here that listen to this show, and you don't mind signing those for these individuals, right, Scott?
I'll sign them. I'll sign any book you put in front of me there, Randy. Hopefully it's my book. But
it is. I got one book here. It's one book I got in front of me. It's Disarmament in the Time of Perestroika. Now, the last time I spoke to you, you were a little bit more optimistic, but only when it came to China. I think you got to be a little more pessimistic with the way things are going right now in terms of the situation with Russia. They're about to sending over Patriot missiles and the entire defense system. How grave of a situation is that thrown into this mix?
Well, first of all, we have to understand that the decision to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine is purely a political decision designed to create talking points. Why do I say that? Because let's say the president approves it today, signs off on it. It takes a minimum of 5 months to train up somebody to operate a Patriot battery. It takes even more time for them to become operationally competent on the system. So we're basically saying that these systems wouldn't be arriving on the battlefield until June, July at the earliest in Ukraine. There was an interview given by General Zaluzhny, the commander of the Ukrainian forces, Zaluzhny, I'm sorry, to The Economist magazine. Fascinating interview. But the takeaway there is that he pretty much says, unless you give us 300 tanks, 500 infantry fighting vehicles, and 500 modern artillery systems complete with virtually unlimited supply of ammunition, we can't win. And he acknowledged that he's not going to get that equipment. And he also acknowledged that the Russians, who he said are very capable, are very professional, and have modern equipment, are getting ready to launch a major offensive that Ukraine will not be able to stop. This is the commander of the Ukrainian armed forces saying this. So my point is, by the time the Patriots arrive on the battlefield, there may not be a battlefield. The war may be over. So it's not a game-changing event. And even, let's say, they could deploy today, the Patriot isn't that good of a system. It's not perfect. We saw it fail in the first Gulf War against the Iraqi Scuds. We saw it fail during the second Gulf War when it shot down more Allied aircraft than it shot down Iraqi missiles. And we saw it fail to perform in Saudi Arabia when the Houthi rebels from Yemen fired Iranian-made drones that destroyed critical Saudi infrastructure. So this missile doesn't have the best track record, and now we're talking about putting it in the hands of freshly trained Ukrainians who are not going to be able to maintain it properly, are not going to be able to operate it properly. It's a death trap. I will predict that the Patriot systems, once they get deployed to Ukraine, will be destroyed piecemeal by the Russians. But again, I think that we're going to be looking at a completely different reality on the ground by the time these systems are ready to deploy. These systems are supposed to provide a defense to the Ukrainians against the Russian missiles that are striking critical Iranian infrastructure at this point in time. So basically what we're saying is that for 5 months, Russia's got a free ride because Ukraine's got nothing to shoot these missiles down. The Patriots won't come in until June. And if the Russians continue to wreak havoc on Ukrainian infrastructure, there's going to be nothing left to defend when the missiles come in. So this is a political ploy by the Biden administration to be seen as standing up to Russia, acting tough, supporting Ukraine. But the reality is everybody knows what General Zaluzhny said in his interview with The Economist to be true, that Ukraine cannot win this war. Ukraine is going to lose this war. The Russians are getting ready to launch a massive offensive to which the Ukrainians have no response.
I heard some news report that it would, if they did ship these the Patriot missile system, that the U.S. troops would have to man them, which would mean we are directly at war. Are we at war with them already? I mean, is there any kind of U.S. personnel right there in the middle of it? Are they just like on the sidelines?
Well, we're not at war. A state of war would mean that we're in direct conflict with Russia. There would be no diplomatic relations. As we speak, there is a Russian ambassador in the United States. There's an American ambassador in Moscow. We have ongoing diplomatic relations. We even have, believe it or not, ongoing trade relations and cultural relations. So we are not at war. There are tens of thousands of American troops deployed into Europe who are there as a deterrence, but they're not active combatants. We do have boots on the ground in Ukraine, but these are primarily people who are involved in accounting for the tens of billions of dollars of American equipment that has been shipped to Ukraine, some technical advisors, and some people involved in the logistics of shipping military equipment from NATO countries into Ukraine in a manner which avoids being detected and destroyed by the Russians. But serving American personnel are not on the front lines fighting against Russia. There are American mercenaries on the front lines. There are American private military contractors who are engaged in work near the front lines. But uniformed American persons are not, I believe, are not involved in frontline activity. Everything they're doing is in support of the military operation. So, we are just below, I think, what could constitute, conducting acts of war against Russia. So, no, I don't think we're at war, but we are close to it. And unless both sides practice, sanity and escalation management, we could inadvertently slide into a war that neither side wants to fight.
Right. I mean, if there is a war between the U.S. and Russia, inevitably nuclear wars would come into the picture. Nuclear weapons would come into the picture, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I mean, that's the risk because neither side can afford to lose. And so either the Russians would decisively defeat the American ground forces, and the United States would be compelled to use nuclear weapons to limit the Russian victory, or Russian forces would be defeated by NATO forces in a manner which threatened the Russian Federation, and they would have to use nuclear weapons. And there's no such thing as a limited nuclear war. Once one nuclear weapon is used, it becomes a general exchange, and all life on the planet Earth terminates. So that's why escalation management is so important. It's so critical that we keep our eyes on the ball. That means that we do everything necessary to avoid direct conflict between NATO and Russia over Ukraine.
I was listening to you talking to George Galloway, and said something it astounded me that during the Gulf War I in '91, only 60,000 artillery pieces were used, or 60, I don't know, artillery pieces were used back then. Was it 60,000? And you're saying that they use that much per week or per day right now in Ukraine?
Per day. Yeah, during the Gulf War, the U.S. forces you fired 60,000 rounds for the entire conflict. Now, some people say, "Oh, it was just a couple-day war." No, actually, the ground war started on February 24th, ended about 4 days later. But prior to that, there was extensive artillery bombardment taking place when both sides were involved in what we call positional warfare. So, for the entire month leading up to the ground war, month plus a week, and then the 4 days of conflict, we are looking at 60,000 rounds being fired. The Russians fire 60, 70,000 rounds a day. The Ukrainians are firing 10 to 20,000 rounds a day. So, this is a scale of munition expenditure that blows the minds of people, and for which the West is unprepared to carry out if there were a war. I mean, the reality is the British Army, using the expenditure of fires that the Ukrainians are using, would run out of ammunition in 2 days. 2 days. And they have no more ammunition. Their stocks would be empty. The United States would run out of ammunition in 2 weeks. The Russians are never going to run out of ammunition.
Right. Well, a lot of that ammunition seems to have disappeared. And you said that when we gave them tons of aid, this $50 billion package, $30 billion supplemental package, that they knew, and of course it's happened, they knew that this would end up on the black market and be given or sold to some very bad actors. They actually knew that this would happen, Scott?
Well, it was predictable. What they chose to do is to make sure that they wouldn't find out immediately. And what I mean by that is they did not employ an inspector general. They did not employ sort of a standing inspectorate who would track where these weapons were going, how they were used, how they were accounted for. They didn't have anything, which means that when these weapons were turned over to the Ukrainians, they just disappeared into this black hole. And anybody with any knowledge of Ukraine knows that there is a black market, there's a criminal element, there is links to illegal arms trade. So you're basically giving them free goodies to disseminate and make money. It's cash in hand, and it hasn't been a surprise that the Ukrainians have. We see these weapons that are showing up in places like Africa and Europe and elsewhere. So that's the reality. This was predictable, and we failed to do that which was required, which was responsible, what due diligence requires to. If we can't outright prevent it, given the level of corruption that exists in Ukraine, at least mitigate the potential harm. But instead, we did nothing. So these weapons are just flowing everywhere.
I'm looking. So we've given all of these weapons, and I also I think you said this the last time. It's depleted NATO or the U.S. Weapons stock. It's like we're not ready at this point. It's almost like we've been disarmed, or the West has been disarmed, NATO's been disarmed, and not prepared for any kind of prolonged or protracted ground war or even air war with Russia. So what happened? I mean, what happened to all of these weapons besides giving it to Ukraine? It's just not prepared, or?
Well, as some Russian officials have told me recently, the Russian military is basically the modern day continuation of the Soviet military. They inherited the preparations that had been made during Soviet times to go to war against NATO. This means millions of men fighting massive, large-scale ground combat over a sustained period of time. Russia built up their weapons stockpiles to sustain that, and Russia maintained these. They kept these stockpiles even after the Cold War ended. So now, on the other hand, in the West, we basically embraced what we called the peace dividend. We were looking for the ability to.
It's okay. I have a dog, too. She was barking like crazy earlier. She fell asleep. She barked so much.
We have the ability to we wanted to cut down on the expense of the Cold War and embrace what we call the peace dividend. So we shrunk our military. It's surprising to say, wait a minute, how could we shrink our military? We're spending much more. Well, that's just the nature of how we do business. But we shrunk our military, and we stopped stockpiling these weapons because we said we're never again going to fight a large-scale ground combat in Europe or Asia. And so we haven't maintained these stockpiles. We are not prepared for this kind of war. And we don't have the capacity to sustain the kind of fighting that's taking place in Ukraine right now. We see that we have turned Ukraine into a de facto NATO proxy. We provided them with NATO weaponry, but they're burning through it. war is a bloody business, and the war with Russia is a very bloody business. And, these tanks are being destroyed, the armored vehicles, the artillery troops are being destroyed, the ammunition's being expended, men are dying. These are loss rates that no NATO army can sustain. I remind people, when you watch the World Cup, take a look at the stadium where these games are played and understand the following. You could put the entire British military in one of those stadiums and still have 40,000 empty seats.
No kidding. Wow. I see that the support of this war with our coalition, which is NATO, is waning somewhat as gas prices go up, and some of these, it's becoming a fractured situation. The support has gone down to 40% in some of these countries. I don't think there's any enthusiasm for a war here. They don't even consult the American people. They just, continue to send arms over there, inflate the rhetoric, and then you got their, the echo chamber on these news shows, and specifically MSNBC and CNN. It's the same. I watch it. It may as well be something I heard in late February. It's almost the same story every single day, that the Russians are being pushed back, and that people are there's an uprising in Moscow. But I saw a report last night on Tucker Carlson, and it looks like there's plenty of goods, and the Russian people aren't suffering. What do you have you heard any reports about the strain on the Russian economy because of this war?
Look, there's no doubt that overall the Russian economy has shrunk around 2.5% because of the economic sanctions. But Russia was prepared for this, and the Russian economy operates differently than ours. Meaning, the Russians don't print money. They don't have the debt load that we have. They have significant reserves. They've planned for a rainy day, and so. Not only is the Russian economy, and as it relates to the average Russian, they're still working, they still have jobs, they're still getting their paychecks, but the Russian system has replaced all of the European goods that used to appear in stores, and replaced it with goods that are brought in from elsewhere, primarily Asia. So the bottom line is, when the Russians go into a store, the shelves are full of quality goods. The Russian food stores are full. Nobody's going hungry. People have jobs. They have energy. Their houses are warm. They have gas for their cars. They can afford the gas for their cars. Anybody who thinks that these sanctions are going to strangle the Russian people and compel them into, rising up in the streets to overflow Vladimir Putin, they simply don't know what they're talking about. It's Europe that is paying the price, the European population that's suffering. The Americans less so, but I challenge any American to take a look at your energy bill and compare and contrast what you're paying now per month with what you were paying this time last year, and you have to acknowledge that our prices have gone up. Yes, Joe Biden has robbed, depleted the strategic oil reserves in order to contain or slow down or lower gasoline prices, but that's unsustainable. And because of our policies pushing this price cap against the Russians, you're going to see that the Russians and OPEC are going to start limiting production, limiting supplies, and the price of oil is going to go through the roof. And there's nothing Biden can do to alter that. So no, Russia's doing okay. Could they be doing better? Sure. But what nation's going to be doing great when subjected to the most comprehensive sanctions regime in the history of the world? But the Russians aren't suffering. Go walk Moscow, man. Go look at the people walking in Moscow. They're out there enjoying life. The lights are on, unlike Kiev. Music, celebration. It's the holiday spirit. It's real. And, that's the sign that the Russian government's doing something right.
The price of gas and natural gas. Look, I'm upstate, and I know a lot of people up there that what they do is they use wood. They're not. It's the price of natural gas or propane. Everything has gone so high that most of these people up there, and it's cold. I mean, it was 18 degrees the other day, and if you didn't have a fireplace, you'd be spending a lot of money. And the same thing, it's even worse for Europeans. What do you see down the road in Europe in terms of their support to continue the sanctions, the public and the politicians? How long can that be sustained in light of the rising price of everything?
Well, we've seen that politically speaking, the Europeans have a propensity to be willing to commit suicide. I just don't understand the mindset of their politicians to continue to double down on stupid and promote continued sanctioning of Russia, knowing that the end result will be the suffering of their own population, not the Russians. I mean, the case in point is this lunacy of the price cap. Trying to put a price cap on. They knew going in the debates, everybody in debating this knew that Russia would avoid this, that OPEC wouldn't support this, that this would be a failed policy that's going to result in not only limiting the amount of energy available to these European nations, but the energy that is available is, the price is going to go through the roof. This is going to collapse their economy. The jobs, factories are going to shut down. Jobs are going to be lost. But they did it anyways. So, at some point in time, I have to question the sanity of the European people, because normally when your elected officials, undertake policies that are extraordinarily harmful to you, you vote them out of office. You remove them from power. This has happened in some instances, but not as much. We'll see what happens this winter. I think that it's going to be a very difficult political season for many European governments, because the people are suffering. The people are starting to lose their patience and lose their temper. And here's the sad thing. As bad as it's going to be this winter, and it's going to be very bad, it's going to be far worse next winter, because the damage that's being done to the economies, the fact that, the gas storage that they have for emergency use, the hypocrites who wanted to cut themselves off of Russian energy made sure that they filled up the gas before they cut off the Russians. So they're saying, hey, we got 90%, we got 100% gas storage. Okay, that's cool. You bought that with cheap Russian gas. Now you've made it impossible to get Russian gas. You're going to use those. They're going to be empty, and you have to fill them up in the spring and the summer with horribly expensive American liquid natural gas. You can't afford to do that, which means that your reserves are going to be at 30% next winter. You're going to run out of gas, and you're going to freeze to death. Wow. That's the guaranteed future of Europe.
Wow.
And there's literally nothing they can do to change that outcome because of the policies they've undertaken. So Europe's condemned themselves to have a difficult winter this year and an impossibly difficult winter next year.
Right. Well, you're talking about the irresponsibility of the politicians not reflecting the mood of the public. Here, it's worse. I mean, really, Congress is like 100% behind this, and not 100. There's some voices of reason there. One in particular is this congressman from who was the main dude when it came to pushing the RussiaGate deal, Adam Schiff, who was a recipient of some campaign largesse from a Ukrainian arms dealer by the name of Igor Pasternak, not to be mixed up with Boris Pasternak. He made a statement yesterday that it was worth it if we had to go and go nuclear, just to not let this, morph into a Russian control of Ukraine. Did you get a chance to see that statement by him? It was very scary.
I looked for it. I couldn't find it, so I haven't had a chance to see.
But you know the guy. You know who he is. I mean, he's definitely off his rocker.
I know who Adam Schiff is, but historically, he has been saying that we need to manage this issue to make sure it doesn't go nuclear. So it would have surprised me if he suddenly made such an irresponsible statement like that, because that's his insanity. And if he did make that statement, he must be called out on it, because this is the exact opposite direction we should be pushing. People need to understand that nuclear war is terminal for the entire human race. You're not going to survive. It's not going to be something that happens over there. Once a nuclear weapon is used in the European context, the United States is going to disappear in a cloud of radiation and thermal explosions, and so will Russia. The world will die. It might take months for the radiation to disseminate around the globe through the jet stream and elsewhere, but everybody will die. Nobody will live. Nobody will be safe. So when people like Adam Schiff, if he said this, he has to be called out on it, because we can't have anybody in the United States speaking about the use of nuclear weapons in such a cavalier fashion. It is literal suicide to use a nuclear weapon. I don't know why we still have them, because of that reality. We can never use them. We can never, ever use them, because the world will end. Therefore, why do we keep building them? It doesn't make any sense.
How many countries have nuclear weapons, and how many nuclear weapons you think are out there?
Well, we know there's the five, acknowledged nuclear powers. Those are the five nations of the Security Council: Russia, China, France, the United Kingdom, in the United States. We know Israel has a nuclear capability. They've all but admitted it. India and Pakistan have nuclear weapons, and North Korea has nuclear weapons. South Africa did develop nuclear weapons, but they voluntarily got rid of them. That was one of the more amazing arms control stories, is how the South Africans decided that when they were going to transition to when apartheid would collapse and the black Africans would get the right to vote and be citizens in good standing, just like the white South Africans, the white government said, we're getting rid of our nuclear weapons. And they did. They turned them over to the international community, and they were disposed of. I don't believe there's any other nation out there. There's talk that Iran is developing nuclear weapons, but I don't believe that's the case. I believe their nuclear program is a peaceful nuclear program. Iraq was pursuing a nuclear weapons capability, but the inspection process that I participated in helped eliminate that threat. So that's where we're at.
What's the prospects? Do you foresee a future? Of course, a future. Do you foresee a possibility that the world that is nuclear armed, that there will be a total denuclearization process, and isn't that a fundamental goal that should be pursued?
Well, it is a fundamental goal. I believe everybody should be moving towards a nuclear zero, no nuclear weapons in the world. But the first thing that has to happen there is that we have to, I believe, have a fundamental change in the geopolitical manner in which the world is organized. Right now, with America's acting as the exceptional nation, the sole remaining superpower, etc., it's impossible to talk about global zero, because the United States refuses to participate in that.
Hello? Did I lose you? Did we lose him?
I'll get him again.
All right, we lost Scott there for a minute. I'm Randy Credico. This is Randy Credico live on the fly here on 99.5 FM in New York City. Here with Reggie Johnson, talking with Scott Ritter about this. And this is like, who on broadcast radio or television has someone like Scott Ritter on? I mean, how fortunate are we to have Scott, who's been on this show 4 times? He's been on other shows here. We are fortunate at this network at this station, Pacifica, to have Scott Ritter on this show, as we have been over 60 years. The people that we get on that you don't see in mainstream media are on here, and you get to hear them instead of the normal garbage that you hear on MSNBC, CNN, mostly at Fox News. Although I must say, Tucker Carlson had some show last night talking about the CIA and Russia. We're going to continue. Scott, let me get back to this book, Disarmament. You were optimistic, and we've got just a few minutes left. Optimistic back then, 91. First, how did you get that role? I mean, that's like 30 years ago, 33. You were like a kid almost. How did you get that spot being for the INF treaty inspections?
I studied Russian history in college and took some Russian language. It was on my military resume, and when the treaty was signed, the Marine Corps was tasked with, coughing up X number of Russian-speaking specialists of a certain pay grade. I was far too junior. They were looking for majors, lieutenant colonels, and colonels. I was a first lieutenant, but they didn't have anybody. And so my name was put on the table, and they said, ship them off. I was totally unqualified for the job. And yet I ended up being the first inspector on the ground. And I always tell people, how do you become an expert? Not by going to school and getting the PhD. The best way to become an expert is to be the first person to do it.
Wow.
Because then you're the only person to do it, and everybody has to lean on you. So that's how I got to do that job.
Well, I mean, all right, I'm going to let you go out to this question, but it's called Disarmament in the time of Perestroika. And there's a picture of Reagan and Gorbachev. There's Reagan. I see him on the right, who drifted away from that statement that he said, Russia the Soviet Union will disappear in 5 minutes, if you remember that. But I guess you were optimistic. Did you think back then that it would ever evolve into this grave situation that we find ourselves in today?
No, I mean, at that time, first of all, the Soviet Union was still in existence. And so I don't think anybody was predicting the fall of the Soviet Union. And even when Russia emerged from the ashes of the Soviet Union, I don't think anybody who wasn't in the government thought the United States would behave as egregiously as we did. Instead of trying to build upon the successes of arms control that we had with the Soviet Union, we viewed ourselves as a victorious power, the Russians as a defeated enemy, and we sought to achieve unilateral advantages. We basically undid all the goodwill that had been done by people like myself and others. So. So I watched that slide away from what we had built to where we are today with a sense of dismay.
Wow, Scott, I'm looking forward to January 15th. Just give us the details once again, and I'll repeat them later. It's at 4:00. It's the Russian Samovar room.
Samovar restaurant. Yeah, you can go on their website, RussianSamovar.com. And in the event section, you'll see Scott Ritter's presentation. You can buy tickets. You get a what's called a fixed price menu. It's the menu they offer theater goers because the restaurant is right there in the theater district. But the event will be from 4 till 6. It'll include dinner. I'll make a presentation. I'll answer questions, and then with the price of the ticket, you get a book, and I will be available to sign any book people want me to sign.
Well, I'm going to bring you some, hopefully a lot of them here from WBAI. Once again, that's on the 15th of January. I will be there, and a lot of my friends will be there. And go online to the Russian Samovar restaurant, and before they all sell out, it's got to be limited seating, Scott.
I think they have the maximum capacity would be 90.
All right.
And hopefully we can get all those sold.
All right. I'm sure they will be sold. Between me and my friends, there's only 75 seats, but we'll be pushing it because Scott Ritter is somebody who should be heard, and this